I want to pursue the general pattern and path of our discussions. Essentially, to allow us to break out, to clear ourselves from the downward and worldly orientation that we're coming from, and be able to orient our lives in the direction that Torah leads us. Essentially, as we started before, we say that we have to come out of Mitzrayim and we get into freedom. The worldly orientation is representative of Mitzrayim. As we discussed the other day, the only thing solid that we can identify with is the natural forces. And how does that translate in a person's own life? Practically speaking, what can possibly give me a solid footing in the world if I have natural backing? If I feel secure financially, with my friends, whatever else. As I mentioned some other time, that we know that in the human mind, in the deep crevices of the human mind, this sense of solid basis, solid ground on a natural basis, simply does not exist. Because we know, as the Gemara says, that yesh lo monef, and one has 100, he immediately has a desire for 200. And if he has 200, he immediately has a desire for 400. Because he immediately sees the limit and the inadequacy of the 200. And he wants 400. Oh, if I get 400, then I will be on my horse. And then this goes indefinitely. How indefinite does it go? Indefinite it goes to the point where we have people who are multi-billionaires. Do you know how much $1 billion is?
1,000 million.
Excuse me?
1,000 million.
That sounds like 1,000 million. Somebody once wanted to illustrate what $1 billion is. We should have some kind of a handle on the subject. So he says, if a man has $1 million, he puts out $1 million and he says to his wife, he says, you can go and spend $1,000 a day. Don't worry, $1,000 a day. How many days will that cover?
1,000 days?
Approximately 3 years, right? Give and take. Approximately 3 years, she can go on spending $1,000 a day, and the money will not be exhausted, right? What if he does the same thing with $1 billion? Says he's $1 billion. Go ahead and spend $1,000 a day. She can go on spending 3,000 years. Okay, so we ever handle it. In other words, in human terms, it's an endless resource. And would you say that they are satisfied?
Financially,
I'm talking about mentally. Financially, they are secure, but we see that financial security is not what the human being is really looking for. There's no real substance to it. In other words, a defined reason what he's looking for. There is something gnawing at him. Oh, it's not the whole thing. Something is missing. Something is missing. I think I mentioned here the time when Howard Hughes died. Did I never mention this? Do you know who Howard Hughes was? Remember to mention it? I mentioned it. Howard Hughes. Howard Hughes was a very gifted engineer. There is the Hughes Motor Company, aviation. No. It's a big aviation, engineering company. Very varied and very big company. He built this company, and it's his name because he actually developed this whole company. He was a great engineer. Howard Hughes, in his day, was the wealthiest man in the world. So you would think that this man would be calm, would be satisfied, would be happy. He was so illustrative. You know what illustrative means? His life illustrated so clearly the inadequacy of worldly pursuit that when he died, the Rebbe spoke about him by the Fabrengen. Briefly. That we see a man having accumulated have reached such, it's not just accumulated wealth because he inherited or invested and he was lucky on the stock market. He really accumulated wealth by his wits, by his wisdom, by his smarts, by his engineering capabilities. It was real wealth. It wasn't a lucky strike. And the man was the most miserable creature under the sun. He never made any friends. He was suspicious of every person that came near him, that he wants something from him. He was jealous for every penny of his wealth. He didn't sleep in one place 2 nights in a row. He had 100, bodyguards around him, and a helicopter from one place to the other. Didn't have a moment of tranquility, a moment of satisfaction. Because it was a complete misunderstanding of the human psyche, the thing what a human being is. And as a result, it brought him only misery. Personally, it brought him misery. A lot of notoriety, a lot of respect for his abilities and so forth, but that's it. Not a moment of satisfaction and happiness. There is obviously a much deeper quest that a human being has. And we are interested in the quest that is inherent in the Jewish human being, in the Jewish soul. Because that ultimately is what we seek. And once we find a way to relate to it, we found our place. We find ourselves. It is a common expression that a person should have a sense of self-respect. If one has a sense of self-respect, then he will be he will have found himself. He will be satisfied and happy and successful and be able to do what he needs to do. And what does it mean, self-respect? How is that defined? Self-worth. If he has a sense of self-worth, and he respects himself, self-respect, then he can walk solidly in the world. Without going into examining this whole approach, I want to present, straight what would be what this quest. This is identified by psychologists. A person has to have a sense of self-worth. What is the Torah view? How is this same concept found in Torah? Anything valuable is found in Torah. And how is the Torah defined as? And I want to go a little bit around the bush and explain a little bit around this concept, and then we'll see clearly that the answer will actually surface. I think that we once touched upon this, the following approach, the following scenario. If one erects a beautiful house, and the house is well furnished, well appointed, it's called. He has everything in there. And that house is situated smack in the middle of the desert. Middle of the desert. Middle of no man's land. Will this house give me satisfaction, a sense of satisfaction? He's got such a beautiful house, such a comfortable place to live in. To build a house in the middle of the desert, land over there is very cheap. You can get it for grabs. What's missing in there? Missing in there is not himself. He is there and he built it and he was able to do all of these things. What's missing in there is that the whole place where he is worthless. It's not what he did. He actually proved himself that he's able to do all of these good things. But where did he do it? Under what circumstances? Totally worthless. How can you live in the desert? What's the meaning of it? In other words, this clearly demonstrates that what we're looking for is not self-worth. What we're looking for is the sense and the understanding that life itself and existence itself and world itself is a worthwhile, is a worthy thing, is a respectable thing. It's not a self-worth he is looking for. It is having the sense that the world I'm living in and the effort that I'm expending in this life is a valuable thing. This is when he begins to be. This is what he's actually looking for, not self-worth. but all the effort, people can put in any kind of effort. We have our soldiers putting their lives on the line voluntarily because they're convinced that what they are doing is a universally good thing. And that itself gives them a sense of satisfaction, even though they're really putting their lives on the line. Therefore, we can come back and examine the world and our lives from the Torah perspective and how we can relate to it and find a path and a solid path in life. A path in life we have from the Shulchan Aruch. I mean a solid path. Now it's something that will encourage us to follow this path. Won't let us fall. Contrary to the way things are defined in the world, that each individual creates and builds his own castle. He builds his own world and makes his life worthy of having lived. And then, from this perspective, of course, if Chas v'Shalom somebody is not doing so well, so he says, "Oh, my life is worthless. What have I accomplished? I'm a failure." And if he is not a failure, and he is accomplished, he is successful, he is constantly aware and constantly concerned. This was Howard Hughes' example. Constantly concerned, what will happen if one misstep and I lose it all? I made a mistake. You know what the Rebbe once told the story, I think I mentioned it here, that this word, that the serpent who's got all his food, very recently I remember we talked about it, he says that the Hashem cursed it that he would be eating the dust of the earth. That's going to be it. Well, for teichal kol mechayecha, you eat dust. So the question is, why is the serpent so unhappy? Or why is it a curse? He doesn't have to worry about his food. The answer is that he is concerned about what will happen after he consumes the whole earth. Finishes his meal. Because there's no reality to it. I once discussed it in broader. What is there in Yiddishkeit? What is there in a Yid, in a Jewish life, that provides this clear and ever rejuvenating and encouraging aspect? Because as we said many times, every day is a new day. And every day you wake up, you have to start anew. You have to have a new impetus, a new encouragement. Where is it? And for this, we have the one simple answer. We have to know that the world, our individual world, is not created by us. I don't create my world. The world was made for me. I'm here part of a great world. And who made that world? That world was made by Hashem Himself. Breishis bara Elokim es hashamayim v'ha'aretz. As we mentioned many, many times, we have to understand what is Breishis. Breishis means in the beginning. What does that mean? The beginning of every thought, the beginning of every sense of value. What makes things valuable? What makes life worthy of effort? What makes anything worthy of pursuit? It is not what I'm going to accomplish from it. It is the fact that this is Bereshis Bara Elokim, is that this is a godly world. It has the ultimate truth represented there. God created the world. The world is not there by accident. It's not there by itself, on its own. What is the concept of creation? I want to perhaps elaborate on certain points. What is the concept that God created the world? Created the world means, again, many of us tend to think in terms of, okay, I'm here and God doesn't like if I act badly, and He likes if I act well, good, according to His wishes, according to moral standards and so forth. This thought is only referring to the world in after the fact mode. After the fact means once the world is here, it has to be good. But that's not creation. Creation means that God created the world. There was no world. There was nothing there. And God chose to create it. When we say that God chose to create it, what does that mean? That God saw there is a godly quality to the world. There's a godly worth for God to get involved and create the world. It isn't just an afterthought. Once the world is here, I'd like to see it run properly. It is an intentional act on the part of the Creator, which means that what is, how do we judge the worthiness of the world? We judge the worthiness of the world not even from a worldly perspective. Like you say, oh, people live well amongst themselves, they're successful, they're happy. This is all describing a good scene within the world context. But there is much, much more to it. It's like saying that it's natural for a person to need food, to require food, because food, the body needs replenishment, and you have to have food to sustain it. And therefore, if you don't eat, you're going to have hunger pangs, and you're going to get weak. In order to safeguard yourself against these negatives, you have to eat. So this is all in afterthought. In other words, because there will be negative fallout, therefore I have to do the positive. But what's the reason for the whole thing? What's the reason for the whole positive thing? There is nothing. You're not talking about the positive, the reason for it. You're saying that to avoid a negative feeling, a negative experience, you have to do such and such. So this is still of a secondary nature. When we say Bereshis bara Elokim, we say no, God created the world from nothing. There is no world, and God went ahead and created it. You know the story, again, this is something which was mentioned before, the story of where the Rebbe Maharash called in the servant, the two, the Rebbe, the Rashab, and his brother the Razor were debating. They were children, and they were debating what's the difference between a Yid and a Goy. And so the Rebbe, their father, Marash, heard their debate. So he called them in, and he said to them, I want to explain to you, I want to illustrate to you what the difference is. And then he told the Rebbe, who was a child, he told him to go and call in to the office, to Rebbe, to call in a Goyish servant who was there, who was working in the yard. So he called him in, and the Rebbe asked him, tell me, did you eat today? So he said, yes. So he said to him, did you eat well? He says, oh yeah, I eat well. That's the way. The Rebbe said, why did you eat? So that I should live. Why do you need to live? So that I can drink a glass of mashke. So I can have a shot of vodka. That's the ultimate experience of life. So the Rebbe said to him, you can go. Then the Rebbe said to his son, he should call in an other Yid also, a very poshet Yid who was also working there. A Kutcher, a Balagola, I think it was. And he asked him the same question. He said, did you eat today? He says, Baruch Hashem, I ate. So he asked him, did you eat well? So he said, what's meant well? What does it mean? Well, Baruch Hashem, I'm not hungry. Why did you eat? So that I should live. Why do you need to live? So I could go to shul and say Yom Nishmi Rabba, learn a Pasha Chumash. So he said to him, okay, you're dismissed. Okay, so he illustrated to them the difference. This seems to be kind of a simplistic illustration, but we have to examine and understand what's behind it. How is this an illustration? We're talking about intelligent people. What's behind it? What's the depth that he was pointing to them? The depth that he was pointing to them is that for the guy, being in this world, within the context of the world, and the satisfaction that the world can present, that is the end of life. That is the end purpose. It's the whole content of life. A Yid, he looks out to something beyond and higher. What davening and learning and saying Kipitul Tilim, that's not bringing any kind of worldly reward. It is not a worldly experience.
Learning is not a worldly experience.
What?
Learning is not a worldly experience.
The real experience of learning is not the fact that I have gotten to understand something. It is the fact that during that, as I'm learning, I have a sense of something that is purer than world, higher than world. If you learn Torah, sometimes I'll illustrate to you. I think I once did it over here. That every svara in the Gemara, even the simplest one, actually represents something that is not a world created, that is of a higher nature than the world. And the real experience of it is this higher nature. This is why when you learn Torah, it purifies one's mind. It elevates a person. When you study lahavdil, secular studies, and you can be very smart and know a lot, but the more you know, the smarter you are, the more self-centered and more aggrandized you become. Because the real satisfaction there is what I have accomplished. The real satisfaction in Torah is not what I have accomplished, but the experience and the insight that I've gotten.
Is that an accomplishment?
Not for the purpose of accomplishment, the experience of it itself. There's a difference whether it turns back to yourself and say, okay, this is what I accomplished. As long as it's centered around this is what I accomplished, that's not what that's not what we seek. It doesn't have a real purpose. It is that, as I said, we sense the presence of something greater, something truer than world. We sense the inyan, the Bereshis Bara Elokim, that the world is not a self-contained entity, but that there is a godly force in the world. And sensing this godly force, this is the end purpose in a Yid's life. This is what elevates him, this is what gives him the strength to go through his life. So coming back to the topic as we started developing it. Yes, there has to be a sense of worth. And we can even call it self-worth. But it's not self-worth coming from the self. It is worth that the world is worthy. It's a valuable place. I'm not living in a desert. I'm not living in a jungle. It's a worthwhile place. It's a valuable place because it has something of a real quality, a real purpose. I want to illustrate it in a very simple sense. If one has a house, and the house is built not in the desert, but it's built in an inhabited area, and it's built properly with an eye to human use. It has a room that's clearly for a sitting room or a living room, a room for dining room, a bedroom, a kitchen. I mean, you could see that it's properly built and properly designed, properly conceived. And then he comes into this house, and it is his job to furnish this house. He has to set the house up. If it is his job to furnish the house, even though, yes, he has to think and he has to figure out where to put what, but the house itself and the purpose for which it is built already speaks for itself and kind of gives him direction as to what he should do, how he should set it up. You still need talent, you still need thought, you still need understanding. But you're not creating the whole entity. Because you recognize what its purpose, you recognize what its function is, and it is properly designed for that function. And the filling in the gaps, filling in the missing places becomes a pleasure rather than a challenge. Because you constantly see how everything comes into focus. Every time you put another piece of furniture in the place, you see the beauty of the house come forth. The beauty of the whole house come forth. Before, when you came in, it was an empty house. It was empty. There was just floors and ceilings. But every time you put a piece of furniture, the beauty and the grand plan of this house comes forth. And you take special satisfaction, even though you didn't do anything, just put up furniture. You take special satisfaction in seeing the beauty of the house come forth. Okay? I don't need to elaborate more. This is an obvious thought. Our lives in this world approximates this concept. Before Adam came to the world was a complete entity, ready to receive this choice of creation, the human being. The human being who's got intelligence, which is something completely devoid in all other animals, in the whole creation. Intelligence means that he senses not just what makes him feel good, like his emotions. He senses what's valuable, what is purpose, what is it all for, where is it coming from, where does it lead to. And he came into a finished product, was made a finished product. The design of the house is all there, but he has to appoint everything. He has to say, okay, how are we going to use everything? Under what circumstances are we going to use it, and how? This is what the Torah says right in the beginning, on Adam Rishon, before the Torah was given. Adam Rishon was told by Hashem on the day of his creation that you should rule in all the animals, in everything that I created, because they were all created for your sake. You should rule over them. What's the purpose of ruling over them? Because he will put things in perspective. He doesn't have to create anything. Why doesn't he have to create anything? Because the value and the beauty of the house is already there. All he has to do is identify it and say, okay, this is for that purpose, this is for that purpose. This is in fact what happened after that Hashem brought all the animals to Adam Rishon. And he told him that he should name them. And what does it mean he told him that he should name them? Because Adam Rishon, in his wisdom, was able to identify the purpose and the place in the world of every animal, what each one is made for. And it was a pleasure function, because every time he identified, he saw the greatness of the world that Hashem created. In our lives, and what we are pursuing is, yes, we have to learn right from wrong, and we have to control ourselves. But we also, along with the specifics that we are learning, and make sure that I'm doing the right thing, we also have to recognize that we are participants in a grand development. Like the Rebbe says, that actually, he says, L'hovili meza Moshiach. All our activities throughout the day and night is L'hovili meza Moshiach. What's meant L'hovili meza Moshiach? To bring about, to reveal, and to finalize the union of Mashiach. What's Mashiach? Mashiach means, Mashiach is a time when the perfection and the real beauty and greatness that Hashem had intended for the world comes into full focus. So that when we are doing our little thing, when each one of us wakes up in the morning and he says Moida Ani, What does it say in Moidani? He doesn't say Moidani, oh, thank God I'm alive. He immediately recognizes. What does Moidani say? Melech Chai v'Kayim. What does Melech mean? The king of the whole universe. He recognizes immediately as he wakes up that he wakes up as part of the whole universe. Because he is, in other words, there's a Melech who is encompassing the entire creation. A Yid is never, ever alone. Because whatever he does, like the Rebbe mentions all the time from the Rambam, where the Rambam says that a person must always regard himself as half and half, have good and have negative, and the whole world as equal balance between good and bad. And when he does one good thing, he is not only benefiting himself, but actually he's benefiting the whole world. All this is pointing to the same principle, that a Yid is never alone. He is never focused on what's my worth. Because his worth is measured not by him being in isolation or living in our context in a desert, but his worth is measured by the fact that he is part of the great creation that Hashem created. Hashem intentionally created him, not as an afterthought, not as an accident, but intentionally. That means that he represents the presence of Hashem in the world. Every individual Yid represents Hashem's presence in the world. So this gives us the background for understanding the practical aspect of this. How does this reflect itself, practically speaking? In the Ranat class, we've been learning lately the Inyan, what it says in the Posuk, that Ruach HaOdom is Oilo Lamailo, and Ruach HaBheimo is Iredes Lamato. What does that mean? Ruach HaOdom means the spirit of man rises upwards, and Ruach HaBheimo, the spirit of the Behemoth, Iredes Lamato, is drawn and tends to go downwards. And we explained, we discussed this in class. And I want to draw from our discussion today and draw it to this practical view. We have to know that each one of us has a Ruach HaOdom and has a Ruach HaBeim. What is Ruach HaBheima? Ruach HaBheima is, in terms of Iredes Lamato, this is what we described before, that if a person has 100, he immediately wants 200. Why does he want 200? Because there is no spirit in the 100. He thought the 100 is going to assure his whole life and take all worries off, all concerns. It's not. The spirit of the 100, the fact that with this 100 he can give tzedakah, the fact that with this 100 he can pay his bills, that's not important to him. The important to him is what kind of base does it give him? And if it doesn't give him a base, he immediately needs 200. He's not looking for the spirit that's inherent in this 100. And this is why it's constantly descending down and down. Because looking for some kind of a bottom, you know, the bottom out. There's no such thing as bottom out, because even the serpent is concerned what's happening if you eat up the whole earth. Ruach ha'odom is oilo l'maylo. We also have a ruach ha'odom. We have a ruach ha'odom. We have a spirit, what's called the human spirit, or even higher than human spirit, the godly spirit. And the godly spirit, this is what encourages us and what reveals to us that what I get out of this activity, that's not the important thing. The important thing is, what is the value of this activity itself? What is the spirit in it? The self-worth of the person is not based on the self, but it's based on what am I representing? Where am I coming from? Who made me? For what purpose? He's looking upwards. With this spirit, he can get himself out of bed in time and come to Seder every day. Because it's not a question of, what am I going to accomplish? It's not me. There's a whole living world, a living creator. This is why I said, when we say in the morning, Melech Chai V'Kayim. It's meant Melech Chai V'Kayim. I'm in the presence of the King, not only the presence, he is the one who returned my neshama to me. In other words, he creates me afresh every morning. That means that my presence in this world is really a very great thing, very valuable thing. And I represent, and everything that I do represents this Chai V'Kayim, this ever-living King. In fact, perhaps not perhaps, for sure, it takes, we have big insight to recognize it, but ultimately, that is in fact what carries us through. The deep down recognition that everything that we do and every moment that we live has an ultimate value, an ultimate life to it. It's not just a momentary experience. And it's not just what I accomplish, what I get out of it. There is real and true value to everything that I do. Why? Because Bereshis Bara Elokim, because Hashem intentionally created me. Which means that this is, before I even came into the world, Hashem had already decided I have to be in this world. Before Hashem created the world, Hashem decided that there should be a world. This is the Torah path. This is the attitude. This is the attitude that carries us through in our lives. This is the attitude that allows us to face any kind of obstacle in our lives and go through with it and rise above it. The episodes which we mentioned, and I'm sure you know even on your own, that when Yidden found themselves in the concentration camps, which means in the lowest ebb that a human being can possibly experience, their lives had absolutely no sense of assurance in terms of, am I going to live through today? There's absolutely no way of saying. Their lives had no worth from a worldly perspective, valueless. They were surrounded by murderous beasts to whom their lives meant nothing at all. And under these circumstances, they survived, they lived. Not only they survived and they lived, but they found inspiration. What kind of inspiration did they find? Months in advance, before Hanukkah, for instance, they would save up they would gather in little, any kind of fat that they were able to get their hands on. And when Hanukkah came, they would gather in some place in a dungeon that it shouldn't be detected. And they would light the Hanukkah candles. And they would make a bracha, Sh'asa Nisim Laviseinu. And they would be inspired and rejoice in Hanukkah. Can you imagine under these circumstances? And you would turn to them and say, hey, are you guys blind? What are you rejoicing about? What kind of joy is this? Don't you see the circumstances you're living under? And they would say, you're an idiot. This is real life. We are really living. This life is not as you measure it. This is real. We are now in a godly state. We are declaring that this is God's world. The fact that there are beasts around us, that's God's cheshbon on why He had allowed them to rule His world for a moment. But it doesn't change the world. It doesn't change the fact that God created the world and there's a godly spirit in the world. This is the same spirit and the same insight and the same attitude that carried the Russian Yidden, the Russian Jews, for 70 years under communism. I know, just to mention from my own experience, because I'm also from Russia, if you don't know, and when I was a child, I was too young before the war to have had any kind of learning. I was too young. So I remember my father, Abba Paltiel, used to wake me in the middle of the night, 3 o'clock in the morning, because we were surrounded with neighbors, Goyish neighbors, and he would be afraid that they would overhear him teaching me anything. So he would wake me up, a little kid, with how a kid wakes up in the middle of the night, and we would take an old cedar. We didn't have an olive-based chart on the big, common xylophone. An old cedar, torn up cedar. He would sit me down on the candlelight, and he would point me, find an olive, or find a beis, and find a gimel. And this is how my exposure to the olive beis was. And he himself, at that time when he was pointing the olive beis to me, couldn't imagine that ever we would be freed and come out of that prison and be able actually to follow through on Jewish life and to use this olive beis. He had no hope at all. But that moment that we lived. That moment we lived. That moment was real. This is what allows us to carry through and to face day by day ourselves, our own obstacles, our own difficulties, to rise above them. And the mitzvah Hashem, like the Rebbe says, Lohovi limeiz HaMoshiach. This is what brings us individually to recognize the presence of Mashiach. The presence of Mashiach means that we live in God's world, not in a Goyish world, not in a natural world, but in a real spiritual world, inspired world, meaningful world, beautiful world. And ultimately it brings Mashiach to the whole world. So make a kitzer of the kitzer. I mentioned many times, you wake up in the morning and we want to turn over the other side. Before you turn over the other side, just say Moidani. First thing you wake up, say Moidani. When you say Moidani and you listen to what you're saying, you say, aha, I'm here, I've arrived, this is the real thing. Let's go into this beautiful day. Let's go and do what we have to do. There's no greater purpose in life than that. And this brings a good day in yeshiva. It brings hatzlocha in yeshiva. It brings hatzlocha in mitzvah Shem when you go out of yeshiva and build your own house. That's what our lives are based on, no matter what we do. Day to day is recognition of the truth of life. Hatzlocha.